Oscar Osbo, that legendary Oscar Osbo in Muskegon's Clear Channel Studios, right? And Oscar, are we in Norton Shores or are we in Muskegon Heights?
I always thought we were in Norton Shores.
Okay, I think we are in Norton Shores, but
actually half of this property is one and half of this property is
there. We go. Well, anyway, thankfully we've got somebody who knows what's going on because he has run for political office, and helping us out in studio this morning, businessman, entrepreneur, political candidate, political guru, and all-around smart guy, Bill Cooper. Morning, Bill.
Morning, Jim. Morning, Oscar.
Morning.
Thanks for having me back.
We normally ask our guest hosts or our co-host to gussy up, maybe hit the hit the barber shop, get shaved and all. Bill's looking like maybe the economy is been a little rough on him, but
no, it's not. You got to change it up once in a while. You know,
got to change it up. Got to change it up.
You can't feel like if you stay the same, you always feel like you peaked, and I don't want to feel like my best days aren't ahead. So once in a while, you got to grow a little facial hair, let your hair grow out a little bit. I told my daughters I'm going to grow it out like Clay Matthews, and they started screaming at me. So I'll probably get cut here eventually. But
I love it. Well,
just got to change it up.
I know when I go on vacation, when I go skiing on a ski vacation, on a few occasions I have said, okay, I'm gonna see what kind of a beard I can grow, and truly it looks like my real home after about 7-8 days is a dumpster someplace. So. Even Honey Bunch is jumping all over me.
You notice I shaved mine off. I was trying.
Oh yeah. You were looking pretty good there. Well, anyway, hey, we're not talking about personal grooming here today. We are going to talk about politics and how it affects you. And at the 9 o'clock hour, we've got, I think, a real treat. The gentleman I found from Reading M Live, he wrote a column about prevailing wage, and he is a black American, although he. It certainly doesn't, at least from my conversation with him, he doesn't sound to me like the person where black is the most important thing in his life. He is an American. But he wrote a great column about prevailing wage and its effects on black Americans. And so we're going to have Stacy at the 9 o'clock hour. He's also president of the Frederick Douglass Society, and we'll talk a little bit about that also. As we like to start out, or at least as I like to start out, some of the various events that have happened on this day in history, and the two real tragedies, which I find, well, actually three tragedies that have happened on this day in history. In 1913, Bill, and this is a little quiz for you, the 16th Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified.
Yeah.
Now, I'll be honest on this. I couldn't tell you what the 16th Amendment was. Bill, do you know?
I think, isn't it the one where they had the right to tax? Is it
there we go. Exactly.
Yeah.
That authorized,
damn, my memory's good.
Authorized Congress to...
You thought you had me, didn't you?
Actually, I did.
Answer the question.
But I wouldn't have asked you if I didn't think you had a pretty good chance of getting it. But that authorized Congress the power to impose and collect an income tax. That's 1913. In and of itself, not a horrible concept, but certainly as it has turned out today, where everybody and his brother seems to think that income taxes are the way to go. Let's take money from the producers and give it to the people who aren't producing. Most of the time it's politicians, but certainly we have a federal income tax, ever-growing federal income tax.
And you said I could jump in any time, and I want to add to that. In fact, one of the reasons why I think I remember that is because there's a statistic that always sticks with me, that in 1913, now I could be off here, general public, but I think you can look it up yourself, but in 1913, I believe that our federal government spent about 8% of our gross domestic product, whereas in 2009, they spent, I think, 37% of our gross domestic product. So that's the change from 1913 until that time.
Unbelievable.
So.
Well, and not only that, at that same time, your state governments, your county governments, your township and city governments weren't spending any money to speak of. And, of course, now we have all the various NGOs and Windsor-Dicks and all these other non-governmental organizations that also take enormous amounts of money. Well, on this same day in history, the same day that we celebrate the power that we have voted on and gave to Congress, to me, it was kind of an interesting thing, but this was a real disaster. This was in Italy, and it was a U.S. Navy plane that hit a cable car full of skiers out in someplace in Europe. I forget exactly where it was. It was I believe it was either an intruder or a prowler. They were hot dogging it, although to their, I guess, defense, this particular cable car was not on their map, so you got to kind of wonder about that. But this is in 1998. But in continuing the tragedies to America, because that of course, brought all sorts of ill will to the United States, and frankly, deservedly so. On this day in 2009, Bill, what do you think happened in 2009 on this date in history, February 3rd, 2009? I think one of the bigger tragedies ever.
Was it when the stimulus was introduced?
Well, it's in the same vein.
Okay.
Eric Holder was sworn in as Attorney General.
Okay.
And
I knew a lot of Obama stuff was happening at that point.
Yes, exactly. And Eric Holder, when you think of Janet Reno and some of the really bad attorney generals in America's recent history, I think there's very little question that Eric Holder stands out apart as truly the worst attorney general in the history of this country. And maybe he'll be able to hold that title, hopefully, forever, because it would be, I think, terrible for this country if we had somebody who was noticeably worse. I would like to mention some things that happened this past week in Muskegon County, because they have a little bit to do with our guest, Stacy Swimp, coming up. But our Muskegon County Board of Commissioners, and I know, Bill, that your knowledge is a little more focused and a little more diverse in Ottawa County, but these types of things happen in other counties and certainly other cities and other states. But there were three events that happened that I thought were really quite sad. In one case, there was a discussion as to whether or not the county attorney should be rehired. Typically a non-event, so they just go right ahead and do it. Well, one of the county commissioners, in this case it was one of the newly elected commissioners, Susie Hughes, said, well, was this particular contract, was this bid out? You know, typically when a contract comes due, we don't want no bidding or zero bidding on contracts. And she was, you can see the video on eyeonmuskegon.com of this Muskegon County full board meeting, which would have been Tuesday of this past week. But she was somewhat made fun of for asking why this should be bid up, and her interest, at least the way it was clear to me, was that we ought to be reviewing all contracts, whether we're comfortable and happy with the provider or not, just as a matter of course. And when the question was asked to the County Administrator Hammersley said, well, I was advised by our attorney that we didn't need to bid it, which, of course, it was the same attorney who was bidding on the contract.
But if people in that room didn't laugh or chuckle or at least take pause when that statement was made, that's part of the problem.
Well, there again, and that's why I bring it up, because it gets even worse. Because longtime County Commissioner Bob Skolnick, a Republican, and he was quoted, and the reason I bring his name up, he was interviewed, and obviously very comfortable in speaking with the new Chronicle reporter who's covering the county commission. He said, well, I don't think we should be hiring the cheapest attorney. Now, that was not the intent. That was certainly no words to that effect were that we're going to look for the cheapest attorney. But Mr. Skolnick, Commissioner Skolnick, seemed to think that was her intent, and how dare that he suggests that we get the cheapest attorney.
No, I think it's simply that whether you're hiring the cheapest attorney or not. I mean,
exactly.
You should at least know.
You ought to at least know that. Don't they have a responsibility? But here's the point of this, because it becomes important to me. This same county attorney who was just rehired without any discussion to speak of, certainly without any competition or being reviewed, had lost, to me, an extremely important lawsuit last year. He had advised the county commissioners on Freedom of Information Act and on Open Meetings Act. And when the county commission tried to slide that $2.4 million bailout, if you will, of the Brookhaven retirement building, the Brookhaven, I forget the exact term on it, they did it in an illegal closed meeting. Now, when the county was sued, alleging violations of the Freedom of Information Act and the violation of the Open Meetings Act, this county attorney, in both written and verbal communication, asserted that there were absolutely no violations and they were going to take it to the mat. When our lawyer pursued it further and said, what we want to have is a full and open lawsuit in court, they folded. They paid us, and they went away. Now, this is really bad advice that they were given. It's doubly bad that this attorney continued to state that there was absolutely no violations. And, of course, the fact that the bad advice was given, paid for by the county commissioners, it would seem to me it would make some sense to find out, well, were you mistaken? Were you purposely giving bad advice? Or perhaps even, did the county board of commissioners tell you just go ahead, fight this thing, we're going to win. We don't know. It was never discussed, but this person, remember, the county attorney may be for the county commissioners, but the county attorney's real job is to protect the citizens and the taxpayers of the county from abuses by all sorts of folks, some including the County Board of Commissioners. So what we have is our new cub reporter over at the Muskegon Chronicle, who's running an article, missed the entire point, seemed to think that Bob Skolnick's totally spurious comment about, we shouldn't hire the cheapest attorney, was the most important point. This young gentleman at the Chronicle missed the entire point, as did every other county commissioner with the exception of Susie Hughes, and I think it's despicable. And frankly, it's scary because it tells you that, once again, some people seem to think that their position in the media is to be the unpaid public relations arm of the County Board of Commissioners.
Yeah. I mean, you've said it, and I don't. For me, I'm not a bomb thrower really, but I feel like the sad thing is that so many people in our citizens just don't understand that. They need that. It's incumbent upon them to govern themselves, and people take so little time because you can say all this stuff, Jim. But let me ask you a question that I think is actually more relevant. How many people were at that meeting?
I think that's the single most relevant question you could ask because, interestingly, and I'll talk about another aspect of this meeting, there was myself, one other woman who was interested in county government, and the only other people who were not part of government were people from the union, who were there to talk positively about the prevailing wage issue here, which was also voted on at that meeting. And when we come back, we'll go into that a little bit because prevailing wage, of course, is we're going to talk about later on, but this prevailing wage issue in Muskegon County will cost, not could cost, will cost the taxpayers of Muskegon a minimum of $2 million and maybe as high as $10 or even more $1 million if we, in fact, go ahead and build this jail. So right after this break,
make a run for the border. Taco Bell is waiting to cook for you. Delicious tacos, nachos, chalupas, gorditas, quesadillas, or try their famous grilled stuffed burrito for only $1.99. Make it a combo for only $3.49. Their large variety includes specialties, combos, supreme salads, and kids' meals. Taco Bell, the best fast food north of the border. So walk in or drive up. Visit all of the Taco Bells in West Michigan. Open Sunday through Thursday, 10 a.m. to 11 p.m. Taco Bell's open Fridays and Saturdays from 10 a.m. until 1 a.m.
$5,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the suspect or suspects responsible for the death of Alvaro Lora. Alvaro was 72 years old, was found by his daughter on April 27th inside his home in Muskegon, brutally stabbed and beaten to death. And still the homicide remains a mystery. Please help Alvaro's family for justice. Anyone with information is urged to contact the Muskegon Heights Police Department at 231-733-8900 or Silent Observer.
What you want, what you want, what you gonna do when Sheriff John Brown come for you?
Call Bad Boys Bail Bonds, open 24/7, 365 days a year. Agents statewide and nationwide. We do 10% bonds for less. Call toll free 866-728-6400. And remember, if we can't get you out, you ain't getting out. Payment plans available. Call now, 866-728-6400.
Classic Computer Sales and Service. They buy, sell, trade, repair, and upgrade. New custom-built computers, 3-year guarantee, excludes laptops. Or your computer tuned up with more memory, hard drive, or maybe a DVD burner installed for $49.95. Need cables, power supply, or get the computer built the way you want it. You can do it at Classic Computer in their new location, 1921 Apple Avenue, Suite B. Call 773-5957. Classic Computer with hometown quality service.
And we are back at Eye on Muskegon, Muskegon County's #1 rated political talk radio show, because we talk about the issues that much of our other media seems to want to either ignore or maybe not even be aware of. But, Bill, before we took the break, you were getting ready to say, actually to toss a bomb. And even though you suggest you don't toss bombs, but I thought you had a really good comment during the break here, and I'd like you to extrapolate on it, if you would.
What I said is that, I think it's really sad that our citizens don't understand that it's incumbent upon them to govern themselves. And I'm so tired of hearing this, greed on Wall Street term, or how all this greed out there, how people are greedy. And I think to myself, is there any more greed on Wall Street than there is in Washington, D.C.? Or you can even take it a step further with back home here. Everybody functions, and the free market dictates that you function in your own self-interest. Is there really any more political self-interest out there than there is economic self-interest? And we all act in our own economic self-interest, but when it comes to overseeing our own local governments, our own federal government, people give them a pass, and they allow them just to spend our money in any manner that they feel necessary without even questioning it. And that's so in another respect, I'm going to jump into another thing. I think that really, if you said to me, these people in Washington, D.C. don't represent us, my response to that is, no, I think that we are probably more perfectly represented in Washington, D.C. today than we've ever been in history. People are getting exactly what they want. We've got a bunch of people that want a lot of stuff from government in Washington, D.C., and they're getting it. And we have another group of people, I tend to be on that side ideologically, in Washington, D.C., that don't want to pay for that stuff. So they're not paying for that stuff. So we have one group of people that's getting exactly what they want from their people, a lot of stuff. And we have another group of people that's getting exactly what they want from their people, nobody willing to pay for that stuff.
Well, and it's beyond that, and I agree with you 100%. It's beyond that because it's not so much a question of willing to pay for that stuff because the money's gone. Now what we're doing is we are willing to mortgage our children and grandchildren's future by borrowing. It'd be one thing if we're spending money foolishly. It'd be one thing if, we got to save up quickly. Our problem is that we have found, and the world has found, by the way, the ability to go borrow, to create money out of thin air and to borrow and borrow and borrow. And it's clear that's not going to last forever. But I agree, Bill, your concept that for some reason, corporate greed, we hear that term all the time. Yeah. Have you ever heard of political greed? Very rarely. And in fact, what we have here in this little story about the attorney situation was that everybody likes Ted Williams. He's a very nice fellow, but he gave very, very bad advice last year, and yet there was not a question about that. There was not a question about even the policy of renewing contracts. Shouldn't we, as a matter of course, renew contracts? When we're going to renew a contract, or at least look at it, at least look at the competition. Thomas Sowell, one of my all-time favorite columnists, he's a world-renowned economist, but Dr. Thomas Sowell's got a great quote that fits in with what you said, Bill. Quote, "No one really understands politics until they understand that politicians are not trying to solve our problems. They are trying to solve their own problems, of which getting elected and reelected are number 1 and 2, and whatever's number 3 is far behind." And
exactly.
If you understand the election and the votes there, then you see that, no, they're not trying to keep, in this case, Muskegon County with the best legal representation. No, they want to keep their buddy on the board. They don't want to offend anybody with the prevailing wage. Bill, you asked an excellent question, I think arguably the best question of the whole morning, and that is, how many people were at that meeting, Jim, because they were going to affirm, which they ultimately did at this meeting, some changes in the prevailing wage rules that they have imposed upon themselves. And everyone, at least 8 of the 9, perhaps all 9, did vote to affirm these prevailing wage rules. Well, showing up at that meeting were at least 2 and perhaps more, maybe 3 or 4 folks who represented the unions. The union side of it. They're certainly welcome to show up. It certainly makes sense for them to argue and articulate their side of the case. Who showed up to articulate the side and the cause of the citizens?
Anybody who voted yes for the prevailing wage, in my opinion, ought to pay prevailing wage when they go to McDonald's, and they ought to pay prevailing wage when they get a house built, and they ought to pay prevailing wage for every good or service they purchase in their life. They should be required to, because if they're willing to tell the taxpayers they have to pay an artificially created prevailing wage, it should be incumbent upon them to pay the same prevailing wage in every service or good they buy.
One would wonder, I know that Bob Skolnick years ago owned and started a very successful business, Muskegon Brake. I wonder if he was paying prevailing wage to his employees back then. I suspect not. And we do know that the county commission chairman, Ken Mahoney, who's very supportive of union issues. Of course, when we were ringing the bells, when the Republican Party was ringing the bells for Salvation Army some years ago, he showed up at Walmart in Norton Shores and was kind of shocked to see a bunch of Republicans standing out there watching him walk into Walmart, the evil non-union Walmart. So, well, anyway, we get sadly, the hypocrisy is absolutely stunning. And it seems to be essentially endless. And there was another issue that came up yesterday where they were talking about apparently the Veterans Administration here in Muskegon County has a new building. apparently federally made and or federally funded, and there's apparently universal agreement that this brand new building is not adequate because apparently they said if people who are handicapped, there's no way to get from the car into the building. It's 300 feet or so. There's an issue there. Now, one would think if this was maybe a Walmart or some other issue, if in fact handicapped people were your customers, that just like hospitals, I know I've been in the hospital on a few occasions, they bring out a wheelchair and they bring you in. Apparently, the federally controlled Veterans Administration building here, they haven't been able to come up with that simple idea. And in the conversation about this terrible mess, because one of the citizens of the county came up and complained about it. Well, the big comment was, well, it's federal, so we can't fix it. No, you can't tell me a county commissioner can't pick up the phone and talk to the head of that building and say, hey, look, when people are coming up, and in particular, when you got an older lady who's very frail and she's got a husband who needs to be wheeled in, we can't fix it? No. Their response was, we're going to try and get, when this contract is over, we're going to try to get the county to build their own building that will be mo better. And in the conversations, because we had earlier talked about prevailing wage, or they had earlier talked about prevailing wage, the chairman of that committee, Jim Derazinski, said, and that was bid out at, it was the low bidder that got that contract, as if somehow low bidder was bad. But what he didn't say was that building was built under the prevailing wage ripoff. So he somehow gave, and he was quite proud of what he had said. You can see the way he presented it on the video. But he was quite proud of the fact, that was low bid, as if there were something wrong. But in fact, it wasn't low bid at all. It's probably about twice the normal bid because it was prevailing wage. It just, there's a disconnect. There is not any interest in serving the people. Can you imagine the three of us here, Oscar and Bill and myself, if we saw a situation where there's 300 feet where some infirm people desperately need to get in, and it's not fixed? Well, it's easily fixable. But what's the county? Our leaders. These are our leaders. They say, well, we can't do anything for 3 or 4 years, but then we'll try to build a new building. Good golly. We wonder why we're driven off a cliff here in Muskegon County?
Yeah. No, we don't wonder.
No,
they wonder. We don't wonder.
Well, they seem to wonder. And their answer is just like, remember in the old days, maybe we don't remember, but certainly in the olden days when there was a solar eclipse and the sun disappeared for a period of time, or there was a lunar eclipse, all the voodoo guys and all the witch doctors came out and said, look, the gods are unhappy. The only way that we can satisfy the gods is to have human sacrifices, or give me, the voodoo guy, give me some more money.
Yeah, I
give me
remember
an extra,
that, don't you, Bill?
Give me an extra lamb. Well, I do. Actually, I do remember that.
Miles was there.
Back in the day.
He's one of the people yelling for this.
When I was a kid, that the witch doctors were out there. But the point is that because there was something happening, and the answer from the leaders was, if you give me more of your stuff, I'll fix it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And, of course, we see this with global warming. They say, all this global warming's going to kill us. But if you give us your stuff, matter of fact, if we use our government to forcefully take your stuff, we'll fix it. It is no different than the witch doctors of old. It is no different here in Muskegon County, where there was no interest in fixing this issue. There was, oh my golly, we've got an issue. We can build our own building, and then we'll have another empty building in Muskegon County.
Yeah, you want me to comment? I can't comment on it. There's nothing else to say. It's absolutely ridiculous. But the sad thing is, once again, we trust these people to manage our money.
Yes.
We trust these people to manage our affairs.
Yes.
And so I just keep reverting back to, that's why we need a smaller government, so we don't give so much of our lives and control and our stuff to a group of people to manage it.
And the only way to get a smaller government is for people to get angry, to get involved. Because, as you said again, how many people were there that were upset with this situation? How many people?
Nobody.
It was on the agenda that the same attorney that had given such bad advice, such costly advice last year, was going to get reappointed. Nobody showed up. The Chronicle was there and totally missed the entire point. I feel sorry for their writer. I don't know if he's being told what to write or he just misses everything. But folks, we can change it, but we cannot change it unless we get out and do something.
Let me ask you real quick, as far as on your website, because you tape all these
Yep.
events. How many people actually watch these and say they're mad as hell, blah blah blah, but they never show up?
You know, it's a really good question. Very few sit down and watch these meetings. And to be honest and fair with the folks who either watch or don't watch, if you don't really understand the background, if you just saw the give and take, for instance, on this reappointment of the attorney, you might have said, well, geez, you know, it seems a little funny. Why not have a competition? But if you don't really quite understand or have any sense of the historical background, then you may miss the issue. Now, I would say this. One of the reasons that I've been showing up at Carmen's Cafe every Tuesday and Thursday when there are county commission meetings from 2 to 3:15 is to talk with people who are interested in government and walk with them to the county building and show them where to sit and where to go and have a discussion of what's going on within the context of what has gone on in the past or may go on in the future. So far, I have not been that successful. I mean, we know that virtually every one of the unions supporting the prevailing wage, supporting county commissioners got reelected overwhelmingly this past election. So,
yeah.
Well, we got a break. We will be back with Stacy.
$5,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the suspect or suspects responsible for the death of Alvaro Lora. Alvaro was 72 years old, was found by his daughter on April 27th inside his home in Muskegon, brutally stabbed and beaten to death. And still, the homicide remains a mystery. Please help Alvaro's family for justice. Anyone with information is urged to contact the Muskegon Heights Police Department at 231-733-8900 or Silent Observer at 72-CRIME.
Bad boys, what you want, what you want, what you gonna do when Sheriff John Brown come for you?
Call Bad Boys Bail Bonds. Open 24/7, 365 days a year. Agents statewide and nationwide. We do 10% bonds for less. Call toll free 866-728-6400. And remember, if we can't get you out, you ain't getting out. Payment plans available. Call now, 866-728-6400.
Classic Computer Sales and Service. They buy, sell, trade, repair, and upgrade. New custom-built computers, 3-year guarantee, excludes laptops. Or your computer tuned up with more memory, hard drive, or maybe a DVD burner installed for $49.95. Need cables, power supply, or get the computer built the way you want it. You can do it at Classic Computer in their new location, 1921 Apple Avenue, Suite B. Call 773-5957. Classic Computer with hometown quality service.
Make a run for the border. Taco Bell is waiting to cook for you. Delicious tacos, nachos, chalupas, gorditas, quesadillas, or try their famous grilled stuffed burrito for only $1.99. Make it a combo for only $3.49. Their large variety includes specialties, combos, supreme, salads, and kids' meals. Taco Bell, the best fast food north of the border. So walk in or drive up. Visit all of the Taco Bells in West Michigan. Open Sunday through Thursday, 10 a.m. to 11 p.m. Taco Bell's open Fridays and Saturdays from 10 a.m. until 1 a.m.
And we are back at Eye on Muskegon. Jim Riley here, Bill Cooper, and the legendary Oscar Osbo running the board. And on the phone from beautiful Flint, Michigan, we've got Stacy Swimp. Stacy, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me today.
Well, it's great to have you. I get a little background on Stacy. I don't have an enormous amount here, but the reason I contacted Stacy was he wrote an excellent article about prevailing wage and the black community that was highlighted in our local Muskegon Chronicle and an M Live, and we're going to talk about that in a sec. But Stacy, in addition to that, is also the president of the Frederick Douglass Society. And Stacy, help me out here. Can you explain to folks what the Frederick Douglass Society is and who he was?
Absolutely. Thank you for giving me that opportunity. The Frederick Douglass Society is a free market institution, a nonpartisan nonprofit which advocates free market solutions in labor and education specifically. Some of our legislative agendas are to see the full repeal of the Davis-Bacon Act on the federal level. To see
Let me stop you there for one quick sec, because Davis-Bacon, a lot of folks aren't aware of it, but Davis-Bacon is much like the prevailing wage issue that we're fighting here in Muskegon County, but Davis-Bacon is a federal law, and maybe you can just quickly explain that.
Yeah, the Davis-Bacon, in fact, is the mother of most state prevailing wages. It was passed in 1931, which requires private contractors to pay the so-called prevailing wage to employees on all construction projects receiving more than $2,000 in federal funding. And the Secretary of Labor supposedly is given the responsibility of conducting surveys of a region's wages and setting rates for up to 100 various classifications of workers. And most often the prevailing wage absolutely corresponds to the union wages. It's really a way of government picking winners and losers, the winners being anyone that's unionized and the unions, and the losers being the majority of the American workers who are not unionized, particularly in urban communities where union membership is very low. Most of the workers in the urban communities, as you know, are not unionized. So in terms of the private workers, construction, carpentry, et cetera, et cetera. So the Davis-Bacon Act covers, I guess, about 20% or so of all construction projects in the United States. And it's really a Jim Crow law. And I know that sounds pretty harsh to some people, but the reality of it is that this law was created for the specific intention of keeping southern black construction contractors and workers from coming to the northern cities at that time to keep them from underbidding and competing with white-only unions. And it came out of the New Deal. It's interesting how the Democrat Party and the left seem to herald FDR, and you see the Congressional Black Caucus and black leaders saying that FDR was this great leader, but actually FDR was responsible for rolling out labor policies that intensified, if you will, and solidified Jim Crow policies in the labor industry.
Well, the first sentence this is what really caught my attention, but the first sentence in your extraordinarily well-written column, and I'll read it. In response to Michigan's stunning enactment of a state right-to-work law which prohibits the firing of employees for refusal to pay union dues or fees, diehard proponents of compulsory unionism are now mounting a desperate bid to sow racial division over such legislation. Now, I want to add to this something that you're probably not aware of, but a little more than a couple weeks ago, I guess it was, the Muskegon County Republican Party had an expert in from the Mackinac Center talking about the prevailing wage issue, which is quite important here in Muskegon because there's discussion about spending upwards of $20, $30, $40, maybe $60 million on a new jail. And prevailing wage is not required by any state or federal laws at this point, but is required because the County Board of Commissioners have decided to impose it upon themselves. But during that meeting, many union leaders, including the chairman of the Muskegon County Board of Commissioners, Ken Mahoney, showed at the meeting. It was an open and public meeting, and they were really quite loud. They were interrupting and saying essentially, as a matter of fact, Julie Dennis, who's a past state representative from our area, accused Republicans in that room, and certainly the gentleman from the Mackinac Center, that their support or their attempts to bring this issue, this prevailing wage issue, was in fact racist. In other words, we are the racist, those who are against prevailing wage. And she went on and on and on. As a matter of fact, it so annoyed me that the head of the meeting allowed her to go on. But the point was that the Republicans were racist and that the entire issue was racist. Now, you have an entirely different view, and I'd like you to maybe just talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, if I could just stop laughing at how ridiculous that commentary is from the person you're talking about.
Well, it was, exactly.
Unbelievable. Well, you have to understand, and to your listening audience, I'm sure it's nothing new to you, this is what the left tends to do. Some people call it Alinsky strategies, but the reality of it is that they use distractions and ad hominems, and they shift the blame. This is what they've been doing forever. Here's the deal. I want to make, because I don't want to get into a lot of complicated legal jargon that might confuse people. I want to see if I can simplify this. Here's the deal, folks. With prevailing wages, what happens is that prevailing wages actually prevents black workers locally from getting jobs, and so what they're doing is they're creating a situation to where people outside of your local community are going to get those jobs. That's really the bottom line. And it's not so much that nobody black would get those jobs, but the reality of it is that these things tend to be disproportionately discriminatory toward minority workers.
What is Stacey?
Intentional or unintentional, that's what happens, folks. And so to have somebody come into your meeting and say that Vinny, I know who you're talking about from the Mackinac Center for Public Policy,
yes,
being racist, by in fact defending the unalienable rights of American workers to be able to compete in a free market society. And understand something. I believe, as Frederick Douglass believed, that people may not get all that they deserve, but they must work for all that they get. I don't believe anybody should be given a competitive advantage in any area of our society based upon the color of their skin, based upon their gender. I don't care what it is. Everyone should be able to compete evenly, but the results should be whatever they are. Nobody should be given better results than the other. And this is what's happening with prevailing wages. The government, where the unions would say, well, we don't set the wages. Well, the government allows the unions to set these wages with these non-transparent surveys, folks. The unions are the ones that are actually creating a socialist, communist environment locally to your community and on the state and on a national level. You better take a look at this, folks, because what's happening is with prevailing wages, it drives your project costs up as well. So what's happening, the taxpayers, you're the ones paying for this. So the projects are being jacked up. The prices of these projects are being jacked up anywhere from 15 to 50% more than what they should be. That's like saying that someone is going to create a business in your area, and they're going to charge 50% more for a product than what they charge in a county 30 miles away. Well, if they do that, what's going to happen is everybody in your county are going to drive 30 miles to get the product somewhere else.
Well, what's happened here in Muskegon County, of course, is that we're surrounded by counties that are doing the right thing, that do not have the self-imposed prevailing wage rules on their own spending, with Ottawa County and, of course, Kent County. And interestingly, just reported within the last week or so, was that the fastest growing job market city in the United States of America is in Holland, Michigan, which, of course, is just south of us. So we continue to do the same types of things that certainly the leaders in Detroit and Flint and Lansing and other failed cities are doing, and apparently expecting a different result. One thing I'd like to mention, in addition, you talk wages, which we know that these wages are phonied up and they're bumped up significantly higher than they would be locally. But it's not just wages. It is benefits and it is paperwork. And I had a younger, or not a younger, but a smaller contractor say, I can't even bid on this because even though I've got 3 people in my firm, in other words, he would be a subcontractor, I can't bid on it because the reporting requirements are such that I've got to handle pension requirements going out decades and all sorts of medical benefits. My employees, in this case, the gentleman said he didn't have health insurance for his employees. He would have had to get a short-term instant health insurance. In other words, what this ultimately does, in addition to costing much more in pay and much more in benefits and everything else. In other words, the total project is going to cost significantly 10 to 30 to 40% is what I've heard, more than otherwise. But what it does is it keeps out, like you just said, it keeps out smaller competitors. It keeps out the small black and minority subcontractors or contractors who are non-union. And think about it. Anytime you want to buy something, for instance, let's just say that in Muskegon County they decided that if you're going to be able to buy groceries, you must buy your groceries only from a store that has union labor. Well, of course, that would mean that the Walmarts would shut down. Does anybody think that the Myers prices would go up immediately if Walmarts were gone? Of course they would. And what shocks me, and Stacy, you're there because I'm sure you know the term Oreo, black on the outside, white on the inside. We know this. Well, we know this has been accused of certainly many of my heroes, and I saw you listing some of yours on Facebook yesterday. But Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams and so many of the who was the comedian Bill Cosby and others. But what shocks me and saddens me is that we do have 2 black county commissioners out of the 9, and both of them have voted their full support and vocal support for this prevailing wage. Why do you think, given that you've seen the destruction that this kind of thing does to the community, there's no negative or there's no net benefit to minorities, why do you think that we have so many folks who are in black leadership in the United States that continue to stand by it, and in particular right here in Muskegon.
That's for the same reason that you had some blacks selling some blacks into slavery in Africa. At the end of the day, you have people who have that slave mentality, who are antisocial in nature, and they don't care about the at-large society. They're only looking for personal advantage. To me, that's not rocket science. And if it gives anybody perspective, there have been studies after studies that have demonstrated that in the states that have repealed prevailing wages, we've seen a number of things took place almost immediately. For example, the so-called gap between black and non-black construction workers actually decreased by over 50% in every single state that repealed prevailing wages. Now, that's a fact, okay? And the average wages for construction workers in areas that have no prevailing wages actually go up, probably on an average of 10%. So while the unions are claiming that prevailing wages actually guarantees higher wages, it actually guarantees lower wages, folks, because anytime that you interfere with a free market, what you're doing is you're putting a cap on wages. You're not bringing wages up as much as you think.
Well,
Okay?
you mentioned something else in your wonderful column, which, by the way, is on MuskegonPundit.com. You can link to it, or I have linked to it, but and you can also, I imagine, just Google Stacy Swimp, S-W-I-M-P. But you also mentioned that, in fact, if these prevailing wages and Davis-Bacon laws were so beneficial to minorities that, in fact, minorities would be moving to those states that have them. But, in fact, the opposite has happened.
Yeah, first of all, let me just make sure we give some clarity of perspective. The article that I wrote is called Black Americans Especially Inclined to Vote with Their Feet Against Forced Unionism. So the article actually wasn't necessarily focusing on prevailing wage. It was focusing on right-to-work laws. And so I didn't want anybody to get confused, because when they go looking for that article, they're going to be thinking they're looking for an article on prevailing wage.
Oh, thank you.
Actually originally published on the National Institute for Labor Relations Research, and then MLive picked it up. And so, but it's still relative what you're saying, because at the end of the day, whether you're talking about right-to-work laws, which are a continuum of the civil rights activism of black and white civil rights activists of the 20th century, and be reminded, folks, to anyone who's listening, that's what it was all about. It was about upholding the rule of law. Speaking of the civil rights movement, they were asking the federal government to protect the constitutional rights of all American citizens, and right-to-work laws intend to do just that. For those of us who are advocates of the repeal of the Davis-Bacon Act and repeal of prevailing wages, it's the same principle. We are advocates of the Constitution of the United States of America. We are, in fact, advocating the civil rights of all American citizens, but particularly those who tend to be marginalized by these kind of policies. Now,
Stacey, hold on just a sec. We've got to take a break. We got to make the enormous amounts of money that our advertising brings in to keep this show running. So we will take a break, and we will be back shortly with Stacy Swimp.
$5,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the suspect or suspects responsible for the death of Alvaro Lora. Alvaro was 72 years old, was found by his daughter on April 27th inside his home in Muskegon, brutally stabbed and beaten to death. And still the homicide remains a mystery. Please help Alvaro's family for justice. Anyone with information is urged to contact the Muskegon Heights Police Department at 231-733-8900 or Silent Observer at 72-CRIME.
Bad boys, what you want, what you want, what you gonna do when Sheriff John Brown come for you?
Call Bad Boys Bail Bonds, open 24/7, 365 days a year. Agents statewide and nationwide. We do 10% bonds for less. Call toll free 866-728-6400. And remember, if we can't get you out, you ain't getting out. Payment plans available. Call now, 866-728-6400.
Classic Computer Sales and Service. They buy, sell, trade, repair, and upgrade. New custom-built computers, 3-year guarantee, excludes laptops. Or your computer tuned up with more memory, hard drive, or maybe a DVD burner installed for $49.95. Need cables, power supply, or get the computer built the way you want it. You can do it at Classic Computer in their new location, 1921 Apple Avenue, Suite B. Call 773-5957. Classic Computer with hometown quality service.
Make a run for the border. Taco Bell is waiting to cook for you. Delicious tacos, nachos, chalupas, gorditas, quesadillas, or try their famous grilled stuffed burrito for only $1.99. Make it a combo for only $3.49. Their large variety includes specialties, combos, supreme salads, and kids' meals. Taco Bell, the best fast food north of the border. So walk in or drive up. Visit all of the Taco Bells in West Michigan. Open Sunday through Thursday, 10 a.m. to 11 p.m. Taco Bell's open Fridays and Saturdays from 10 a.m. until 1 a.m.
And we are back at Ion Muskegon. We got Bill Cooper. We got Oscar Oswald. We got Jim Riley, your lovable little fuzzy host, talking about how we can make this county and this state and this country a better land. And we got Stacy Swimp still on the phone with us. And Stacy, actually, Bill had a question that he wanted to jump on you.
No, I just want to say I really appreciate what you're saying, Stacy, because I agree with it. And you know, it's a hard time you have a hard time arguing logic and facts, but I also appreciate it because you're saying things that for somebody like me would be difficult to say.
I got to stop you. Stop you, and I got to respectfully stop you. I want you to understand something.
That's always the best way to stop somebody.
There is no truth that you cannot say. That is a leftist lie, and I want you to understand something. I want you to think just for a moment. Think back to 1860, the founding of the Republican Party. And this party was largely founded as an abolitionist movement to stop slavery from advancing in the northern states. Now, I want you to ask yourself a simple question. Where would we be as a society today had Abraham Lincoln and all those members of the Republican Party said, well, you know what, we can't do that because, you know, we can't say certain things. Well, if that had happened, folks, we'd still be running around with Confederate flags, running around all over the place, and we'd probably be speaking German. Okay?
You're right. But, Stacey, let me comment back on that then. You know, at that time, black people did not have a voice. Black people did not have a voice, so they couldn't speak for themselves.
It's still a straw man argument, what you're saying. I'm going to tell you why. Because your point was, you said, I can say things you can't. I'm saying to you that God is no respecter of color, and at the end of the day, if you are a friend of the truth, then you stand on the truth. If somebody has a problem with the truth, then let them have the problem. But don't you for a moment, don't anyone listening to this interview, don't you ever let people on the left make you afraid of what you know is right.
You know, let me jump in here on this because Bill said something that I'm going to disagree with a little bit. Bill said that back in the days of Lincoln and the days of slavery that blacks did not have a voice, which is certainly true. But there's the assumption that black people, black Americans, have a voice today. But as Stacy, I'm sure, is well aware, really only one kind of black voice is allowed to be heard without being denigrated. Yeah. And it's the black liberal, the black, as you said, the slave masters, if you will. We know what happens to folks like you when you get public.
Well, if with regard to, you have to excuse me, and if I sound at any point like I'm tongue-tied or et cetera, it's because I'm actually fighting a cold to your listening audience. I don't want anybody thinking
that sounds like an excuse.
What's wrong with this guy? but so I apologize.
You sound great.
Audience. But let me just say that yes, it's true that the leftist media, mass media, which tends to be controlled by the left, obviously will denigrate, will malign, will disrespect anyone, whether black or white, but particularly black. Why is that, folks? Because you have to understand something, and I'm going to give you just a 2-minute clip if I can.
Sure.
The leftist Democrat Party of the South, which was a slave-holding party, they were what was called an ethno-nationalist state, if you will. Ethno-nationalist is a term which simply means that they believed in separatism and white supremacy. Let's just cut through the chase, okay? And this is what the Democrats were about then. And they felt that black people were to be subservient to them. Now, let's fast forward now in the 21st century. Now, and folks, you're going to love this because the apologists for the Democrat South of the old days they're quick to remind you, well, we have black people that fought in the Confederate War. Well, we have 96% of black folks that are voting for liberals today, so that's no surprise to me. It's always been that way, one way or the other. You've always had somebody black on the wrong side of the equation. In fact, Frederick Douglass wrote a speech saying what the black man wants, and he acknowledged that there were blacks who were actually defending the Confederacy, and Frederick Douglass said they were on the wrong side of the war. So understand something. Let's fast forward this. We have to know that the same Southern Dixiecrat party that was existent trying to keep people under the thumb in those days, they're the same party. Understand that they're the same. They have not changed their platform. They've always been an anti-freedom, pro-slavery party, then and now. So it's not surprising to me that they respond that way, especially, if you will, to black conservatives in this country, or blacks who do not conform with the leftist ideology, because they're so indoctrinated all these centuries, if you will, to the ideology of superiority. Speaking of the Democrat Party, the white liberals, and that they now have this innate response to us.
Well, it was clear.
Basically, that says, who do you think you are? You know, you have to stay in your place. And unfortunately, just like on the plantation, now this is serious now, just like on the plantation, understand, on the plantation in the South, you have what was called black drivers. Now, these were slaves that the slave master would use to keep the slaves on the plantation in a mindset, of you will, of being obedient and submissive. So he would always find a black slave in the field to help keep the slaves in line. Now, if you juxtapose that today with the 21st century, who would you think of if you were to consider who might be those black slave drivers to manipulate, exploit, and take advantage of the masses to try to keep them in line with the leftist agenda of the Democrat Party? They would be the Congressional Black Caucus, if you ask me. They would be the NAACP. It would be Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton. On your local level, they would be your black Democrat city councilmen, your black Democrat city county commissioners. If you have a black mayor, it would be your black Democrat mayor. They're the same slave drivers today that they were in the 17th and 18th centuries.
Well, that is a mouthful, and I got to tell you, I sort of sense that, but I don't have an intimate knowledge of the black community here in Michigan. You certainly do in the Flint area. And of course, again, we see a situation where we have elected leaders in Muskegon County who seem to ally themselves with union goals, with frankly, as you're suggesting, white racist union goals. And yet, when the Republicans have a meeting, the union leaders, by the way, all white, show up, accuse the Republicans of being racist in their attempts to at least have a discussion about prevailing wage or right to work. And in fact, that seems to work because, as we know, as Mr. Goebbels in the Nazi days of Germany suggested quite accurately, and it's been repeated because it is so true, if you repeat a lie often enough, it starts to be believed as fact. And what we're hearing is that if you are against these certain issues, you are racist. If, in fact, you are for this, you're going to reduce the wages and things of that sort and opportunities. But let me ask you this. We're going to have to take a break here shortly, but I'd like to have you back, and unless we get distracted during the break, I would like to talk to you about how tough it is and how you're overcoming this natural a fear that those on the left side who want to shut down people like you, how you're facing that and how you're overcoming it. So we will be back with our little fun Sunday morning group right after this break.